Good evening. Welcome back to Legislative Journal. My name is Tom Chris. Thanks for tuning in. It's the second week in a row I've worn my new tie. I haven't had a new tie in 12 years. I've got a new tie, and I'm going to wear the heck out of it. So anyway, great hour there with Bob Anderson. Bob's a very, lifetime experience. Counts a lot. And Bob's got a lot of lifetime experience. So I always enjoy him coming on. Thanks for your calls. Appreciate that. Next hour, we will have open phone. So if you got any topic you want to talk about, maybe the one we're going to talk about right now we'll follow up on, because it's one that we've wanted to do for a long time, or I've wanted to do. It's all about me anyway. But I posed a question maybe months ago of a rather innocent question from me. What's in the ground? Brownfields I hear about. I grew up, or my formative years from 70 to 80 were dominated by Lois Gibbs. She was on the news every night. I didn't know who the heck she was. I really didn't care about the news that much. But that was right here. Ground zero. I remember driving out in high school to see the chain link fences around people's houses. So that was a big impression, an impressionable time of my life. So anyway, it's always kind of been a topic of mine of what's under the ground or what's in the ground that we walk on and live in. And we are a very big manufacturing base, and I know from having my days in Albany and working there that you just can't tear down that stuff that goes from just about the Skyway to Dunkirk. I take people from out of town on a driving tour of that area usually, because it is like a driving museum. Big industrial buildings that are vacant, and we can't afford to get rid of them. So, brownfields is the normal topic, but I went on a quest for who can begin this dialogue. Hopefully we'll talk about this until we have a distinct answer of what is in the ground. A lot of people already know. I don't. So, with that, I went online and read about it, and I found Art Voice did a series on this. And then there's a book called The Tipping Point, where people are connected to people, and somebody knows everybody. I found these two guys. I don't know where. In the dirt, I guess. But anyway, they were great enough to come on tonight. Hopefully they'll come on a bunch of times. I'm saying that without doing the show yet, but they seem to have expertise in this topic, and we'll try and interview a bunch of people on this topic, but maybe we'll always come back to somebody that knows somebody. Now, first of all, I used to write for this paper a long time ago, Art Voice, out of Buffalo. Art Voice is she's just about the biggest weekly in all of Erie County. If not, well, it is the biggest weekly. It's the barometer of cool, which Jamie Moses has set out to do, and it is. But Art Voice is just cool. It's also informative. So, one of the editors of Art Voice, or are you the editor? Jeff Kelly's with us tonight. Jeff, are you the editor?
I am the editor-in-chief, yes.
I only knew Jamie Moses. I mean, he did everything. He told me he did everything. No. Anyway, thanks for coming. And
my pleasure.
Lou Ricciuti. Lou, thanks you for coming.
Thank you for inviting us.
I had in my mind have it that, Jeff is at Art Voice, so that gives him a moniker, but I have it in my head that you're more like a researcher. I'm a former researcher myself, and that's kind of a compliment for me to call anybody a researcher. Is that how I would describe you?
Yes, and I thank you for that compliment.
All right, hey, where do we start? I had an innocent question of what are brownfields? I hate to go this way, but this is how my mind works. I asked the county manager in Niagara County, hey, what are brownfields? Can you help us do a show on it? Because I think at least a dozen callers had called in and said, let's do a show on brownfields. He said, absolutely yes. I got a 19-slide PowerPoint presentation which talked about, like government programs about brownfields, but it didn't tell me what a brownfield was. So I don't want to start there. I want to start with what is, where are we? The ice moved. I've got 2 young kids, and I've watched Ice Age, so I'm educated by TV. The ice moved, and what are we left? But Jeff, where do we start?
Well, I would start by pointing out that the last thing you want to do is ask a politician for a definition of something that is essentially scientific. They're not going to know. They're going to know what the program is. They're going to know where the money is. And the tax breaks and things like that.
So they actually answered correctly.
As best
all
they
I
could.
know is, if I ask a baseball player about football, they're not going to give me the answer.
Right.
So they answered with, we have government programs to take care of that.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Exactly.
Good. So they're not idiots. They just know their business. They don't know your business.
Yeah.
I'll say that. Rich, I just got zapped again. If I say anything wrong, Rich zaps me. So where would we start to have this discussion then? Can you help me on this journey? This is like Blue's Clues. Do you have young kids? Sesame Street.
A little bit. I mean, essentially, Lou and I were just talking about the sort of brownfields designation and what it means essentially, and it is essentially, really, wouldn't you say, a sort of governmental program. It hasn't got so much to do with what precisely is buried there or what is necessary to remediate it. It's more of a way of shifting property.
I would say that it's a governmental public relations mitigation campaign, and that's pretty much what brownfields represent.
Rich, run subtext under Lou's. Put English under Lou's thing. We need a subtext. No, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
So that's a good place to start because I heard about brownfields through the government indoctrination of me, and it really, we had dirty dirt before we had the term brownfields. I mean, so let's go back to the beginning. Is where we want to do.
Right. You have these post-industrial properties that have been abandoned by their corporate owners because the cost of remediation is too much for them. Other business trends, whatever, have led them to relocate. They've left behind these terrible, toxic dumps. And what's there, varies. But in any case, it's expensive to remediate. And the brownfields programs are essentially ways of removing that liability from the previous owner of the property, absorbing it into a governmental program so that basically the public becomes liable for the cost of remediation, and I put quotation marks around remediation. And then ostensibly that brownfield is then ready to be passed on to a new private owner for some new use, for which it is now designated as safe and appropriate, whether that, and I put quotation marks around that as well. And that helps to remove the liability from the prospective new owner. So in other words, it's a way of taking the liability away of this great expense and possible litigation if things go wrong from previous owners and from new owners.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me give you a little bit of a...
Hey, will you first tell Bobby Harper, who's on the phone tonight, that there's a cup of tea in the microwave? Okay, good.
Okay.
You've done it.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Now I won't interrupt again.
No,
if I get
right.
a cup of tea, I won't interrupt you all night.
Well, then maybe we can get you a cup of tea, hopefully.
Save the show.
The word brownfield, used in the United States, in other parts of the world, the use of the name brownfield was used
No, go ahead. Ignore
No,
these
no,
people.
we'll get that T in here. Okay.
That man behind the curtain.
The use of the term brownfield was used in Europe probably 20 years before it was heard in the United States. And in Europe, the term brownfield simply meant a piece of property that had been used. Not that it had been used for industrial purposes necessarily. It could have been a homestead, it could have been a school, it could have been some other use. But they called those brownfields. Well, in about 1992 or 3, I think it was right around there, the EPA had their first pilot program in the United States, brownfields.
I'm sorry, what was that year?
In 92.
92, 3.
It was
Okay.
coined in the
Go
United
ahead.
States in 92,
Okay.
and the first project of brownfields in the United States from the US EPA was in 94.
Gotcha.
Now, all of this, again, sort of revolves back around the Love Canal days and something called CERCLA, which is part of the US EPA Environmental Protection Program. CERCLA is an acronym that stands for the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act of 1980, which is a direct outcome of Love Canal. Once you find out that a piece of property is contaminated, obviously you have to determine to what degree it's contaminated and what materials it's contaminated with. Now, the problem with this idea of brownfields is, like Jeff said, that it's a way for the government or industry to limit their liability. Well, what's not being said in these things is that the liability is never negated. It never goes away for the population, for the people that live in the surrounding neighborhoods and that sort of thing. Unless the property is clean, there's still hazards involved. So with the use, I think that the use of the term brownfield is either a misnomer in today's day and age. There's time for maybe new lingo for all of this. And it needs to be reevaluated. We've gone the 30 years now from the days of Love Canal up to the current time, and it's time to reevaluate and reassess what we call brownfields. The reason that a property is called brownfield is that, and I'll read the quote, it's expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of real property complicated by the presence or potential presence of hazardous substance, pollutant, contaminants, that sort of thing. It doesn't say to what degree it's, obviously if it's a hazardous waste site, it's a hazardous waste site, it becomes a Superfund on the CERCLA list, etc. Well, if they can mitigate, if they can eliminate the potential exposure by simply paving over a piece of property, thereby the fumes may not come up through the pavement, it's a brownfield now. So there's a lot of discrepancy between what really is and what isn't. Mm-hmm. And in the discussion that I had earlier today with Jeff and another associate of mine is that in a community that has limited real property, it doesn't matter if it's Niagara County, if it's Erie County, if it's somewhere else in the nation, when you have a certain postage stamp size of real estate, real property, that you base all of your revenue, your tax revenues on, when you put industry on that parcel of property for 100 years, each year when more and more contaminants come onto this property, it makes the property less and less valuable, to the point, which Jeff so succinctly said, is that it becomes more costly to remediate and clean up a piece of property than it ever will have value again. So rather than cleaning it up to its most pristine state, so that it, and you wouldn't be able to put a price tag on doing that, they take properties that are marginally contaminated and just on the border of being a hazardous waste site, they put paving over it, whatever the case may be. They call it a brownfield. And of course the US EPA, in their wisdom and a way to promote economics within the United States, rather than promoting health, they'll promote the economics of, we need this tax base, we need this piece of property to come back onto the tax rolls, and therein lies the cat chasing its tail.
That does seem to always be the thing. We want it back on the tax rolls. What about just having it clean? But anyway, let me not go there. What is in the soil, we're all more sensitive to, or educated, I should say. A company doesn't necessarily, I imagine there's companies that buried stuff, literally bad stuff in the ground. There's other companies that, just like the railroad tracks behind us, the soot just rolls off for 75 years and it's in the ground. So, not really a malicious intent to pollute. We're just more educated. What's the ratio there? There weren't always evil people or evil companies. It's just dirty. We've lived the industrial age. It's over. Or no, is there always... Did that railroad track also hold buried nuclear waste?
Well, I would remind you that those railroad cars were coming from these sites carrying hazardous materials from former atomic sites and chemical plants and things like that. So who knows what rolled off those trains?
Yeah. It's over. Or no, is there always... Did that railroad track also hold buried nuclear waste?
Well, I would remind you that those railroad cars were coming from these sites carrying hazardous materials from former atomic sites and chemical plants and things like that. So who knows what rolled off those trains?
Yeah.
Well, actually, we know.
Who knows? You point at Lou.
It's not pretty. Yeah, Lou's research has shown that some of it is, you go visit Lou and look at his archives and read some of the old documents and bills of, and it can be quite frightening, you know. And there is that question of like, oh, we're much more educated now and we know more, and so we shouldn't cast aspersions on the people in the 50s who were just sort of dumping things willy-nilly in farmers' fields. But the fact is, in 50 years, are people going to say about us, oh, they just didn't know that much. They didn't know exactly how bad these things were. They did know back then. They did know it was dangerous. And you can see that in old letters written back and forth. One of the ones, when Lou and I first met 7 years ago, one of the letters he showed me was one from the Army Corps of Engineers to an engineer at Lindy in North Tonawanda. And they were debating through the series of letters what to do with all of this this incredible volume of effluent, of liquid that was contaminated with, that was radioactive and toxic chemicals. And the advice from the Army Corps of Engineers to the Lindy staff was, you have two options. You can either dump it in a storm sewer, which will then empty out into a waterway and then, spread out that way. Or, on the other hand, you can pump it into shallow wells on your own property and let it disperse into the aquifer and just go in all directions. They recommended the second one because they said, literally, down the road, if there are liability issues, they'll never be able to prove where it came from if it's dispersed through the aquifer.
It could be tracked back through creeks. It could be tracked back through...
People would witness the effluent coming out.
Through the smell, through the steam, through the loss of vegetation along the creek beds. So as Jeff said, what Lindy was instructed to do, Lindy Union Carbide by the Army people in this letter that dates to the 40s, I believe?
1944,
1940s,
No, 46.
They told him to inject it into the ground so that it disappears. Now, I went to a meeting in Tonawanda several years ago when Supervisor Moline was still the town supervisor there.
No, he's still there today. And well, they just flip-flopped. They went from Moline to Calabrese back to Moline so he could get a pension from the school system, blah, blah, blah. I live there.
So I asked him at a public meeting at the school